He was a titan of industry, a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires with the same ruthless precision he used to curate his life. She was his wife, the beautiful gentlewoman who believed his love was her greatest treasure. But when she offered him the one thing money couldn't buy, a child and heir, his response wasn't joy, but a chilling, quiet command. Get rid of it. He gave her a choice: the baby or their life of unimaginable luxury. He never imagined she would choose a third option: disappear. Now, 5 years later, a mysterious new CEO has taken the helm of his biggest rival, a woman with a brilliant, merciless strategy and a name no one recognizes. But he recognizes her eyes, the same eyes that once looked at him with adoration, now burn with the cold fire of revenge. He is about to learn that the woman he tried to break has returned to break him. The world knew Adrien Blackwood as the undisputed king of the concrete jungle. His empire. Blackwood Holdings was a behemoth, its tendrils wrapped around every facet of modern life, from the skyscrapers that clawed at the clouds to the technology that hummed in the pockets of millions. He was a man sculpted from ambition and forged in the crucible of ruthless competition. His face, a mask of cold, chiseled perfection, graced the covers of financial magazines. His name whispered in equal parts reverence and fear. He was not just a millionaire. He was a creator of millionaires, a destroyer of rivals, a modern-day Midas whose touch turned everything to gold or to dust. His wife Isabella was the one soft brushstroke in his otherwise starkly defined world. She was the envy of many, the beautiful, serene woman who had captured the heart of the uncapturable Adrien Blackwood. To the outside world, she was the epitome of grace and fortune, draped in couture and dripping with diamonds, the perfect accessory to a man of his stature. They had met at a charity gala, a whirlwind romance that had culminated in a wedding so lavish it was dubbed the social event of the decade. Isabella, an art historian with a gentle soul and a love for the timeless beauty of the past, had been swept off her feet by his charisma, his power, the sheer force of his will. She saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath the steel, a man who needed the warmth she so freely offered. Their life was a meticulously curated tableau of wealth. Their penthouse apartment, a glass and steel eyrie perched atop one of his own skyscrapers, offered a panoramic god's-eye view of the city. It was a space of minimalist perfection, all clean lines, monochromatic palettes, and museum-quality art. Yet for all its breathtaking beauty, it was a home that held its breath. The silence was often broken only by the distant hum of the city below, or the soft, almost apologetic chime of a grandfather clock in the cavernous hallway. It was a beautiful cage, and Isabella, though she loved Adrien fiercely, was beginning to feel the press of its golden bars. Adrien's love was a possessive, controlling thing. He adored her, of that she was certain, but he adored her in the same way he adored his collection of rare sports cars, or his priceless Damien Hirst sculpture. She was a beautiful object to be admired, to be shown off, to be kept pristine and untouched by the ugliness of the world. He dictated her schedule, chose her friends, and even curated her wardrobe, his praise the currency for which she unwittingly bartered her own identity. She had given up her career at the museum, her small circle of bohemian friends, her quiet life of books and art, all for him. And for a time his love had been enough, but a quiet, insistent longing had begun to bloom in Isabella's heart, a desire for something more, something real, something that was truly hers. A child, an heir to the Blackwood dynasty? Yes, but more than that. A tiny, warm, living being to fill the echoing silence of their lives, to infuse their gilded cage with the chaotic, messy, beautiful reality of love. She imagined a small hand in hers, the sound of laughter bouncing off the cold marble floors, a reason to exist beyond being Mrs. Adrien Blackwood. She had been feeling unwell for weeks, a persistent fatigue, and a new sensitivity to the world around her. At first she had dismissed it as the languor that sometimes crept upon her in her idle life. But then a dawning, electrifying possibility had taken root. With trembling hands, she had taken a home pregnancy test, the 2 stark pink lines appearing like a miraculous, life-altering sunrise. Joy pure and unadulterated had flooded her so potent it left her breathless. This was it. This was the key. The answer, the one thing that would transform their perfect house into a real home. This would surely melt the final layer of ice around Adrien's heart. He would be a father. The fierce protectiveness he showed for his company, for her, would now be directed towards their child. She imagined him, the great Adrien Blackwood, brought to his knees by the tiny grasp of his own son or daughter. She decided to tell him that evening. He was hosting a dinner party, a command performance for a coterie of his most powerful business associates and their lacquered wives. Isabella, as always, was the perfect hostess. She moved through the glittering crowd with an ethereal grace, a secret smile playing on her lips, her hand instinctively, protectively straying to her still flat stomach. The gown Adrien had chosen for her, a column of silver silk that shimmered like moonlight on water, felt different tonight. It felt like a chrysalis, the beautiful casing for the incredible transformation happening within her. Later, after the last guest had departed, leaving behind the ghost of expensive perfume and the faint scent of cigar smoke, she found Adrien in his study. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, the city lights a carpet of captured stars at his feet. The power that radiated from him was almost a physical force. Adrien. She began, her voice softer than she intended. He turned his eyes the color of a stormy sea, fixing on her. A faint smile touched his lips, the rare, possessive smile that always made her heart flutter. You were magnificent tonight, my love. The perfect hostess. They were all enchanted by you. Thank you, she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She walked towards him, her silver gown whispering against the plush carpet. She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with all the love and hope in her heart. Adrien, I have something to tell you. Something wonderful. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his gaze. Oh, we're going to have a baby. The words tumbled out soft and full of wonder. I'm pregnant. She waited for the explosion of joy, the embrace, the triumphant laugh. She waited for him to sweep her into his arms, to share in the monumental, world-altering significance of her announcement. Instead, the silence in the room deepened, becoming heavy, suffocating. The faint smile on Adrien's face did not widen. It simply vanished. His eyes, which a moment ago had held a spark of warmth, turned to chips of ice. The hand holding the whiskey glass was perfectly still. He looked at her, truly looked at her, but the man she loved had been replaced by the cold, calculating CEO of Blackwood Holdings. And then he spoke, his voice quiet, devoid of any emotion, a voice that could sign off on the destruction of a company with the same chilling calm. No, he said. Isabella's smile faltered. "No what?" "What do you mean?" "No." "I mean, no," he repeated, taking a small, deliberate sip of his whiskey. "You will not be having a baby. You will make an appointment. You will get rid of it." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed from her lungs. The glittering city lights blurred into a meaningless smear. "Get rid of it," she whispered the words, tasting like poison in her mouth. "Adrien, this is our child, our baby." "It is a complication," he said, turning his back on her to once again face the city he owned. "A distraction. Our life is perfect as it is. A child changes everything, and not for the better. The noise, the mess, the demands. It is an unacceptable disruption to our business, to our lives, a disruption." She repeated, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and a dawning, horrifying understanding. "Adrien, it's a life. Our life together. I thought you would be happy." He finally turned back to her, his face an unreadable mask of stone. "Happiness is a well-managed portfolio, Isabella. It is a rising stock price. It is the acquisition of a rival. It is not soiled diapers and sleepless nights. Our marriage is an asset, a successful merger of my public image and your beauty. A child is a liability." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and bitter. "So that's all I am to you. An asset. A part of your portfolio." "You are my wife," he said, as if that explained everything. "And you will do as I say. I have built this life for you, for us. I have given you everything you could ever desire. I will not have it jeopardized by this sentimentality." He walked over to his desk, his movements precise and controlled. He picked up a pen and a piece of his personal embossed stationery. He scribbled a name and a number on it. It was the name of a private clinic, one known for its discretion and its wealthy clientele. He held it out to her. "Make the call tomorrow. I will have my assistant arrange everything. We will go away for a week to the Maldives, perhaps. When we return, this will all be forgotten. A minor inconvenience successfully dealt with." Isabella stared at the piece of paper, at the elegant, sloping script of her husband's handwriting. It was a death warrant for her child, for her hopes for the love she had believed was real. In that one devastating moment, the beautiful gilded cage Adrien had built for her revealed itself for what it truly was, a prison, and she, its beautiful, prized captive. The tears that had been welling in her eyes now fell freely, tracing cold paths down her cheeks. She looked at the man she had married, the man she had loved with every fiber of her being, and saw a stranger, a monster in a bespoke suit. She didn't take the piece of paper. She didn't say another word. She simply turned and walked out of the study. Her silver gown, once a symbol of her beautiful life, now feeling like a shroud. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed once, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed the shattering of her heart. Adrien Blackwood had made his demand. He had drawn his line in the sand. And as Isabella walked through the silent, cavernous rooms of their perfect home, a new, terrifying and yet liberating thought began to take shape in her mind. He had given her a choice, the baby or their life together. But he had never, not for 1 second, considered that she might just choose the baby and a life of her own. The king had made his decree, but he had forgotten one crucial thing, even the most beautiful songbird. When its cage becomes a tomb, will find the will to fly. The night was a long, dark, and sleepless torment. Isabella lay in their vast, cold bed, the space beside her empty. Adrien had not come to her. He had remained in his study, the Titan in his tower, confident in his decree, certain of her compliance. The thought was a fresh stab of pain. He didn't see her as a partner, a person with her own heart and mind. He saw her as an extension of his will, a beautiful automaton programmed for obedience. Every kick of the tiny life inside her was a silent, powerful protest against his command. This was not a complication. This was a person, her person. A fierce, primal wave of protectiveness washed over her so potent it extinguished the last embers of her naive love for Adrien. The man she had adored was a phantom, an illusion she had desperately wanted to believe in. The real Adrien Blackwood was the one who had looked at her with eyes as cold as a winter sea and ordered the termination of their child as if it were a failing business venture. As dawn broke, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and grey, Isabella made her decision. It was a choice born of terror and a strength she never knew she possessed. She could not stay. She could not sacrifice her child for a life that had been revealed as a hollow, gilded sham. She would disappear. Her movements were quiet, furtive, like a thief in her own home. She bypassed her vast walk-in closet, a treasure trove of designer clothes and jewels that Adrien had curated for her. They were not hers. They were part of the costume for the role of Mrs. Blackwood. Instead, she found a small, forgotten suitcase in a storage room, a relic from her life before Adrien. Into it, she packed the few things that felt truly her own. A worn copy of 100 Years of Solitude, a framed photograph of her parents, a simple, faded sundress that she had loved. She took no jewelry, save for the simple gold locket her grandmother had given her, which she wore around her neck, hidden beneath her blouse. She paused her hand, hovering over her wedding and engagement rings, glittering obscenely on her dressing table. With a surge of revulsion, she left them. They were shackles, not symbols of love. The final and most crucial part of her plan required a level of cunning she was surprised to find within herself. She knew Adrien's world was one of surveillance and control. Her credit cards would be tracked. Her known associates watched. She needed cash and a way to vanish from the grid. She remembered a conversation she'd overheard Adrien having weeks ago. A boastful, careless remark about a rainy day. Fund, a physical safe hidden in his home office behind a false panel in the mahogany bookcase. He had been gloating to a business partner about having untraceable assets, a contingency for unforeseen market volatility. The irony was not lost on her. He was about to experience a different kind of volatility. Her heart hammered as she slipped into his inner sanctum, the room where her dreams had been so cruelly executed just hours before. The air was still thick with the scent of his whiskey and his cold, unyielding authority. Following the memory of his words, she ran her fingers along the spines of leather-bound first editions. Behind a copy of The Art of War, she felt a slight give. The panel clicked open, revealing a small black digital safe. Her blood ran cold. A code. Of course there was a code. She tried the obvious, his birthday, the date of their anniversary, the ticker symbol for his company. Nothing. Panic began to bubble in her chest. Then her eyes fell on the framed photograph on his desk. It was the only personal item in the entire room, a picture of him, with his late father, a man who had started the Blackwood Empire from nothing a man Adrien both revered and desperately sought to surpass. She remembered Adrien once mentioning the date his father had founded the company, a date he spoke of with almost religious reverence. With trembling fingers, she punched in the 6 digits. The safe beeped and clicked open. Inside were stacks of cash euros, dollars, Swiss francs, and several bearer bonds as untraceable as currency. She took a fraction of it, enough to survive, to build a new life, but not enough to suggest a calculated, greedy theft. She was leaving a life of unimaginable wealth. She was not a thief. She was a refugee. Just as she was closing the safe, her eyes caught something else, a slim leather-bound journal tucked into the back. It was her husband's private journal. A wave of guilt washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a desperate need to understand. She took it. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, it held a key, a clue, a reason. With the cash and the journal secured in her bag, she penned a short, simple note. Adrien, I cannot do what you ask. I am choosing my child. Do not look for me. Isabella. She left it on her pillow, a final stark message in the vast empty bed. Then, with one last lingering look at the life that had almost cost her everything, she walked out. She didn't take the private elevator. She took the service lift, her simple suitcase a stark contrast to the opulence she was leaving behind. She emerged into the bustling, anonymous streets of the city, a ghost leaving a palace. Her first stop was a small, out-of-the-way electronics store. She paid cash for a cheap, disposable phone and a new SIM card. Her old phone, the one Adrien had given her, she dropped into a public trash can. It was her digital leash, and she was now free of it. Next, she went to Grand Central Station, the great, teeming heart of the city. She bought a one-way ticket on a train heading west, a destination chosen at random. As the train pulled out of the station, leaving the city skyline and the Blackwood Tower behind, Isabella finally allowed herself to breathe. The tears came then not of sorrow, but of a terrifying, exhilarating freedom. She was alone, pregnant, and running into an unknown future. But she was alive, and so was her child. In the days that followed, Isabella became a phantom. She moved from town to town, always paying in cash, never staying in one place for more than a night or two. She cut her long, dark hair short, dyed it a mousy brown, and bought plain, unassuming clothes from thrift stores. The beautiful and elegant Isabella Blackwood was gone, erased. In her place was a quiet, determined woman who was fighting for her life. During the long, lonely nights in cheap motel rooms, she read Adrien's journal. What she found chilled her to the bone. It was not a diary of emotions, but a cold, calculating ledger of his life. He wrote of business deals, of corporate espionage, of the strategic takedown of his rivals. He wrote of her, Isabella, not with love, but with a chilling detachment. She was his greatest acquisition, a valuable social asset, her beauty and grace a significant boost to the Blackwood brand. He detailed his plans for their future, a future that included no children, whom he referred to as unnecessary drains on resources and emotional capital. He believed love was a weakness, a sentiment that could be exploited by his enemies. The journal was the final, brutal confirmation of the truth she had been too blind to see. He had never loved her. He had only owned her. Her journey eventually led her to a small, quiet town in Oregon, nestled in a valley and surrounded by towering pine trees. It was as far from the cold, steel and glass world of Adrien Blackwood as she could get. She rented a small, furnished apartment above a bookshop using a fake name and a story about being a writer seeking solitude. The town, with its close-knit community and its gentle pace of life began to heal her. She found a part-time job working in the bookshop, the scent of old paper and ink, a soothing balm to her fractured soul. As her pregnancy advanced, she found an unexpected network of support. The women in the town, the bookshop owner, the doctor at the local clinic, the other expectant mothers in her prenatal yoga class, they wrapped her in a cocoon of kindness and genuine care. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as an accessory or an asset, but as a person. One crisp autumn evening, as she sat by her window watching the leaves fall, she felt a strong, definite kick. She placed her hands on her belly and smiled a real, genuine smile. She had made it. She was safe. And she was not alone. She had her child, a tiny, resilient warrior who had fought alongside her from the very beginning. Meanwhile, back in the city that had been her prison, Adrien Blackwood was a man unmoored. Her disappearance had been a blow not to his heart, but to his pride, his control. He had been furious, his rage echoing through the silent penthouse. He had hired the best private investigators money could buy, commanded them to scour the earth for her. But Isabella had vanished without a trace. Her credit cards were untouched. Her friends knew nothing. Her digital footprint had simply ceased to exist. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air. For Adrien, it was the ultimate infuriating betrayal. Not of love, but of ownership. A prize asset had been stolen from him, and he could not get it back. His life, once so perfectly ordered, now had a glaring, untidy loose end. And as the weeks turned into months, the silence in the penthouse began to change. It was no longer the peaceful, controlled silence of his own making. It was a hollow, mocking silence, a constant reminder of the one thing he could not control, the one person who had dared to defy him. The king was still on his throne, but for the first time his castle felt empty, and he was alone. Utterly and absolutely alone. The birth of her son, Leo, was the moment Isabella was truly reborn. In the sterile, quiet room of the small town hospital, as she held her tiny, perfect child for the first time, the last vestiges of the timid, broken woman she had been were washed away. In their place rose a fierce, unyielding love, a purpose so profound it reshaped her very soul. Leo, with his tuft of dark hair and his impossibly small fingers wrapped around hers, was her world. He was the reason she had run, the reason she had survived, and now he was the reason she would fight. The first few years were a struggle. Money was tight, and the fear of being found was a constant low-level hum beneath the surface of her new life. But there was also a richness she had never known in her gilded cage. There was the joy of Leo's first smile, his first steps, the sound of his laughter filling their small apartment. There was the quiet satisfaction of earning her own money, however meager at the bookstore. She was no longer defined by a man, but by her own resilience and her love for her son. She devoured books on business, finance, and technology, the subjects that had once been Adrien's exclusive domain. Her mind, once soft and pliable, sharpened. She discovered a surprising aptitude for strategy, for seeing patterns and opportunities where others saw only chaos. The bookstore owner, a kind, astute woman named Margaret, noticed her talent. She began giving Isabella more responsibilities, consulting her on inventory, on marketing, on the future of their small business in an increasingly digital world. It was Margaret who unwittingly set Isabella on her new path. "You have a mind for this, my dear," she said one afternoon, looking at the impressive sales figures Isabella's new online strategy had generated. a real killer instinct. You remind me of a young woman I once knew who went on to build an empire. The words sparked something in Isabella. A killer instinct. She had one. It was the same instinct that had guided her out of Adrien's life, the same instinct that fueled her ferocious love for her son. But what if she could channel it into something more? What if she could build something of her own? Something to protect Leo, to give him the future he deserved. She began to study the corporate world with a new hungry intensity, and her focus inevitably drifted back to the world she had fled, to Blackwood Holdings, and to its chief rival, a dynamic but struggling tech firm called Phoenix Enterprises. Phoenix had innovative ideas, brilliant engineers, but lacked the ruthless leadership and strategic direction to truly challenge Adrien's dominance. It was an eagle with clipped wings, powerful but unable to soar, using a pseudonym. Isabella began participating in online investment forums, her analyses of Phoenix's stock and market position so sharp and insightful that she began to gain a following. She saw their weaknesses, their missed opportunities, their potential. She saw a path to victory where they saw only a stalemate with Blackwood Holdings. Her anonymous online persona nemesis became a legend in certain financial circles. Her predictions were uncannily accurate, her strategic advice brilliant. She caught the attention of the board of Phoenix Enterprises, who were desperately seeking a new leader, a new vision to save their company from being swallowed by the Blackwood behemoth. They tried to discover the identity of this mysterious nemesis, but Isabella, ever cautious, had covered her tracks perfectly. Then Leo had a health scare, a severe asthma attack that had landed him in the hospital, his small body struggling for breath. The fear she felt was a cold, sharp knife in her heart. The local clinic was wonderful, but they didn't have the specialists or the advanced equipment he might one day need. For the first time, Isabella felt the sharp pinch of her limited resources. Her son deserved the best, the kind of security that only real power and wealth could provide. That night, she made a decision. It was time to stop hiding. It was time to fight. It was time to take what she wanted, what she had earned. She reached out through a carefully constructed series of encrypted emails to the chairman of the Phoenix Enterprises board. She laid out a daring multi-year strategy to not only save the company, but to challenge and ultimately surpass Blackwood Holdings. It was audacious, brilliant, and utterly ruthless. The board was stunned and intrigued. They agreed to a clandestine rendezvous in a neutral city. Isabella spent weeks preparing. She used the last of her emergency funds to buy a simple but elegant power suit. She had her hair professionally cut and styled the mousy brown, replaced by a chic, sophisticated dark auburn. She practiced her pitch, her voice, her posture, forging herself into the woman she needed to be. The woman who could walk into a room of powerful men and command their respect. The woman who could face Adrien Blackwood and not flinch. When she walked into the boardroom at the Four Seasons in Geneva, the board members saw a woman they did not recognize. She was no longer the soft, gentle Isabella. She was a vision of cool, confident power. She introduced herself not with her old name, but with a new one, a name of her own, making Anya Sharma. She delivered her presentation without a single note, her voice calm and steady, her arguments irrefutable. She dismantled their current business model and rebuilt it before their eyes, her vision so clear, so compelling that it left them breathless. She answered their questions with a precision and insight that belied her years. She spoke of market trends, of disruptive technologies, of corporate warfare. She spoke Adrien Blackwood's language, but with a creativity and daring he had never possessed. They were captivated. They were convinced. By the end of the meeting, they had offered her the position of CEO. Isabella, now Anya Sharma, accepted. Her salary was astronomical, her power immense. Her first act was to move her headquarters to bring the fight directly to her enemy's doorstep. Phoenix Enterprises would now be based in the same city as Blackwood Holdings. She bought a beautiful, secure home in a quiet, exclusive neighborhood, a home with a large green garden for Leo to play in. She hired the best tutors, the best doctors. She gave her son the world she had dreamed of for him, a world of safety and opportunity. And then she turned her attention to her enemy. For 5 years, Adrien Blackwood had continued his reign, his company growing, his power seemingly absolute. He had never remarried. No woman could ever live up to the perfect image he had constructed of Isabella in his mind, the beautiful, obedient wife. Her disappearance was a cold, hard knot of failure in the pit of his stomach, the one acquisition that had gotten away. He had, over the years, almost managed to forget her, to bury her memory under mountains of money and success. Then the news broke. Phoenix Enterprises, his perpetually weak and struggling rival, had appointed a new CEO, a complete unknown. Anya Sharma. The business world was buzzing. Who was this woman? Where had she come from? Adrien at first was dismissive. It was a desperate, foolish move by a dying company. But then Phoenix began to move. They poached 2 of his top executives. They launched a new product, so innovative and disruptive that it sent shockwaves through the market, directly challenging Blackwood's flagship technology. They outmaneuvered him on a crucial acquisition, a company he had been certain was his. Anya Sharma was not just a new CEO. She was a predator. She moved with a speed and a strategic brilliance that Adrien had never encountered before. She seemed to anticipate his every move, to know his playbook inside and out. It was uncanny. It was infuriating. He had to meet this woman. He had to see the face of his new and surprisingly formidable rival. He arranged a meeting, a courtesy call, between the 2 CEOs at a neutral location. Adrien walked into the private dining room of a Michelin-starred restaurant, his usual aura of supreme confidence firmly in place. He was ready to intimidate, to dominate, to put this upstart in her place. And then he saw her. She was standing by the window, her back to him, looking out at the city. She turned a cool, polite smile on her face. "Mr. Blackwood, thank you for meeting me." The world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from his face. It was her. It was Isabella. But it wasn't. The soft, gentle woman he had known was gone. In her place was a stranger, a woman with his wife's face, but with eyes that held the cold, hard glitter of a diamond. Eyes that looked at him not with love, not with fear, but with the cool, appraising gaze of an equal, of an enemy. "Isabella," he whispered the name, a ghost on his lips. Her smile did not waver. "I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else," she said, her voice as smooth and cold as polished steel. "My name is Anya Sharma. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." He stared at her, his mind reeling, the pieces of the puzzle crashing together with devastating force. The uncanny knowledge of his strategies, the ruthless, brilliant attacks on his company, the 5 years of silence. It was all her. The woman he had tried to break, the woman he had discarded, had disappeared, and she had returned as the CEO of his rival, a queen, forged in the fires of his own cruelty, ready to burn his kingdom to the ground. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Anya was its undisputed grandmaster. For Adrien, it was like dining with a ghost, a beautiful, terrifying ghost who wore his wife's face and wielded a power that directly threatened his own. He was thrown completely off balance, his usual arsenal of intimidation and charm rendered useless. Every question he asked, every attempt to break through her facade, was met with the same cool, polite, and impenetrable wall. "You have my wife's face," he said, his voice tight, dispensing with the pleasantries. Anya took a delicate sip of her wine, her eyes meeting his over the rim of the glass. "A fortunate coincidence for you then, Mr. Blackwood. It must be comforting to see a familiar face in a new rival. But I assure you, I am my own woman. My history is in finance, not in a museum." The barb was subtle, but it landed with surgical precision. He tried to probe to find a crack in her armor. "Where did you study? Who did you work for before Phoenix?" "My resume is a matter of public record, should you care to look," she replied smoothly, though she knew he would find a carefully fabricated but impeccable work history. She had spent a small fortune and called in every favor to construct the identity of Anya Sharma, a brilliant but reclusive financial prodigy who had made her fortune in private equity in Europe. It was a ghost story, but a believable one. "But I find discussions of the past to be unproductive. I am far more interested in the future, specifically the future of the market share currently held by Blackwood Holdings." Adrien felt a surge of his old anger. "You're playing a dangerous game. Phoenix Enterprises is a minnow swimming in a shark tank." "My shark tank." Anya's smile was thin and sharp. "Perhaps the minnow has evolved, Mr. Blackwood. Perhaps it has grown teeth." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential conspiratorial tone. "For instance, your upcoming bid for the government's 5G infrastructure contract. A cornerstone of your 5-year growth plan, I believe. It would be a shame if a competing bid, one that is more innovative, more cost-effective and, dare I say, more ethically sourced, were to be submitted." Adrien's blood ran cold. The details of his bid were one of the most closely guarded secrets in his company. How could she possibly know? The thought that she had a mole, a spy deep within his organization, was a violation he couldn't stomach. The paranoia began to creep in. Who could he trust? The dinner ended with a cool, formal handshake. Adrien left in a state of turmoil he hadn't experienced since his company's tumultuous early days. He felt outmaneuvered, exposed. He had gone to the meeting to assess a rival, and he had left feeling like he was the one who had been dissected and found wanting. He went back to his office and did what he did best. He declared war. He launched a ruthless campaign against Phoenix, cutting prices on his products to undercut theirs, launching a smear campaign in the financial press and poaching their key suppliers. He would crush Anya Sharma and her upstart company. He would remind her who was king. But Anya was always one step ahead. It was as if she had a copy of his playbook, because in a way she did. She had lived with the author. She knew his arrogance, his blind spots, his reliance on brute force over subtlety. For every move he made, she had a countermove ready. He cut prices. She launched a premium high-end version of her product that appealed to a different demographic, creating a new revenue stream. He smeared her in the press. She gave an exclusive, charming interview to a respected journalist, painting herself as a dynamic innovator, and him as a corporate dinosaur, trying to stifle competition. He poached her suppliers. She had already secured exclusive contracts with new, more innovative partners overseas. The battle for corporate supremacy raged, and the business world watched enthralled. Anya Sharma was a phenomenon. She was fearless, brilliant, and she was winning. Phoenix's stock soared while Blackwood Holdings began to show its first signs of vulnerability in over a decade. Adrien became obsessed. He had his security team run every possible background check on Anya Sharma, but they came up with nothing. Her fabricated past was a fortress. He had his investigators try to trace Isabella's path, but the trail was 5 years cold. He was fighting a ghost and a genius, and they were one and the same person. The pressure began to take its toll. Adrien. The man who prided himself on his icy control became volatile, his temper flaring in board meetings, his decisions becoming more reactive and less strategic. The silence of his penthouse apartment no longer felt like a symbol of his power. It felt like a cavernous, empty tomb. He found himself staring at the space on the dressing table where Isabella's rings used to lie. He had ordered her to abort their child, had called it a liability. Now his entire empire was threatened by the woman he had so casually cast aside. The irony was a bitter, indigestible pill. Meanwhile, Anya's life was a carefully balanced symphony of power and sorrow. Her days were spent in the war room, masterminding Phoenix's rise. But her evenings belonged to Leo. She would leave the cutthroat world of business at the door of her beautiful, warm home and become just Mum. They would build Lego castles, read stories, and bake cookies. Leo was a bright, happy, and loving child, oblivious to the corporate war being waged for his future. He was her anchor, her true north, the reason for her fight. One evening, as she was tucking him into bed, he looked at her with his serious dark eyes so like his father's. "Mum," he asked, "do I have a dad?" Anya's heart clenched. It was the question she had been dreading. She sat on the edge of his bed and took his small hand. "Everyone has a father, sweetie," she said softly. "Yours, he lives very far away, and he wasn't able to be a part of our lives." "Is he a good person?" Leo asked, his voice small. Anya hesitated. What could she say? How could she explain the man who was both his father and her nemesis? "He's a very powerful man, Leo," she said carefully. "But sometimes powerful people make mistakes. They hurt people they are supposed to love. The most important thing for you to know is that your mom loves you more than anything in the entire world, and I will always, always keep you safe." She kissed his forehead, her love for him a fierce protective fire. As she walked out of his room, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that Adrien Blackwood could never again harm her or her son. It was about building a fortress around their lives, so strong that his shadow could never touch them again. The war was about to escalate. Anya knew that to truly win, to secure her son's future and topple Adrien's empire, she couldn't just keep countering his moves. She had to land a decisive, crippling blow. And she knew just how to do it. She had something Adrien didn't. She had his journal, the cold, calculating ledger of his sins. For years she had kept it locked away, a painful reminder of the man she thought she knew. But now she saw it for what it was, a weapon that contained details of deals, of tactics, of a corporate philosophy so ruthless it bordered on the illegal. It was the key to his destruction. But using it was a risk. It would expose her own past her identity as Isabella. It would bring the private war into the public eye. And she didn't know how that would affect Leo. As she wrestled with the decision, a new player entered the game, a twist she could never have anticipated. She received an anonymous email. It contained a single encrypted file. When she opened it, she found a detailed dossier on a series of secret offshore accounts held by Blackwood Holdings accounts used for illicit payoffs and to hide undeclared profits. It was a smoking gun proof of massive financial fraud. At the bottom of the email was a single sentence: "He destroyed my family too. Use this, a friend." Anya stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She wasn't the only person Adrien Blackwood had ruined. She had an ally, a ghost from Adrien's past who wanted revenge as badly as she did. The journal was her weapon, but this was a nuclear bomb. Adrien Blackwood thought he was fighting a business rival. He had no idea he was fighting a coalition of the damned, the ghosts of his own making rising up to claim their pound of flesh. The final act was about to begin, and the fall of the king was imminent. The anonymous email landed in Anya's encrypted inbox like a thunderbolt. It was a dossier dense with financials, routing numbers and dates, a meticulously detailed map of Adrien's secret empire of fraud. The message attached was brief, chilling in its simplicity. "He destroyed my family too. Use this, a friend." The words confirmed a grim reality. She was not the only ghost haunting Adrien Blackwood. He had built his kingdom on a graveyard of ruined lives, and now the spirits were rising. This dossier was more than a weapon. It was a mandate. Her original plan for a precise, surgical takedown felt insufficient. This was no longer just about her or Leo. It was about justice. The kind of justice that requires a public stage and a fallen king. While Anya forged her new weapon, Adrien was spiraling in his own fortress of paranoia. The war with Phoenix was a bleeding wound to his pride and his company's bottom line. His board was whispering his investors were nervous, and the aura of invincibility he had cultivated for decades was beginning to crack. In his desperation, he ordered his investigators to abandon all pretense of subtlety and dig into every aspect of Anya Sharma's personal life. He wanted a weakness, a pressure point he could squeeze until she broke. They found one. They found Leo. When the file containing the investigator's report and a candid photograph of the boy landed on his desk, Adrien's world came to a halt. He stared at the picture of the small child playing in a park, his dark hair ruffled by the wind, his expression one of serious concentration as he examined a ladybug on his finger. It was like looking at a phantom. He saw his own father's eyes, his own childhood face staring back at him. The age, the timeline, the uncanny resemblance, the pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. This was not Anya Sharma's son. This was his. The complication he had ordered erased from existence. A storm of emotion the likes of which he hadn't felt since he was a powerless boy himself ripped through him. There was shock, yes, and a flicker of something that might have been regret, a ghost of a lost future. But these were swiftly consumed by the emotion that had guided his entire life, possessiveness. The boy was a Blackwood. He was his, an asset that had been stolen from him. In the twisted calculus of his mind, regret transformed into rage, and rage into a strategy. He saw a path to victory, a way to reclaim everything. He would take the boy. He unleashed his legal team, a pack of sharks who smelled blood in the water. A lawsuit was filed, a brutal public petition for paternity and full custody of Leo Blackwood. The documents painted Anya Isabella as a manipulative, unstable kidnapper who had abducted his son and was now using him as a pawn in a corporate vendetta. He would prove she was an unfit mother and take back what was his. When the papers were served, Anya felt not grief or fear, but a fury so cold and pure it was almost serene. He had done the unthinkable. He had weaponized their child. He had aimed his cannons not at her corporate empire, but at her heart, at the one pure and sacred thing in her life. The war was no longer about stocks and market share. It was about survival. He had left her no choice. He had to be annihilated, his power to harm her, or her son erased from the earth. The stage for the final act was the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, the venue for the annual Blackwood Holdings shareholder meeting. This was Adrien's cathedral, the place where he renewed his vows of power before his disciples. He stood at the podium, a vision of bespoke confidence, his voice resonating through the opulent room as he spun tales of future growth and dismissed the temporary market turbulence caused by his rival. He was mid-sentence when the grand doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. Anya Sharma walked in. A hush fell, a wave of shock silencing the room. She was the enemy, the serpent in their garden, and she had just breached the gates of the palace. She was not alone. Holding her hand was Leo, his small face a mask of solemn curiosity. Behind them walked Margaret, the kindly bookstore owner, who had been her first ally, her presence a symbol of the life Anya had built from the ashes. Adrien froze, his face paling. "Security," he snarled, his voice cracking. "Remove her." "I don't think you want to do that, Adrien," Anya said. Her voice, calm and steady, was picked up by the microphone she carried, and it echoed through the silent room. She began to walk slowly towards the stage, a queen advancing across a chessboard. "I believe I have a right to be here. You see, I recently became the majority shareholder in the holding company that owns the largest institutional block of your stock. Enough, I believe, to call for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO." Gasps and frantic whispers erupted. The press corps surged forward like a wave. She stopped at the foot of the stage, her eyes locking onto Adrien's. "Most of you know me as Anya Sharma. That is the name I chose for myself, but the name I was given was Isabella." She paused, letting the weight of the name settle. "Isabella Blackwood." The room exploded. "I am his wife," she continued, her voice cutting through the pandemonium. She gestured toward the entrance where Leo stood, his hand now clutching Margaret's tightly. "And that is his son. The son he ordered me to abort 5 years ago because he was a liability to his perfectly curated life." She held up a slim, leather-bound journal. "I have here Adrien's private thoughts, a record of his business dealings, his contempt for the law, his belief that blackmail and intimidation are just tools of the trade. It makes for fascinating reading." Then she delivered the killing blow. "But I also have something more concrete. I have irrefutable proof, which my legal team is distributing now, of a massive multi-year tax fraud and money laundering scheme funneled through a web of offshore accounts." Her eyes bored into Adrien's. "Proof that was given to me by another one of your victims, Adrien. It seems your past has finally caught up with you." Chaos reigned. Board members, their faces ashen, stared at the damning files in their hands. Adrien stood as if turned to stone, his empire, his life, his very identity disintegrating before his eyes. He was no longer a king, just a criminal exposed on a stage. Anya raised her voice one last time, a clear, final judgment. "Your CEO is a liability this company can no longer afford. The board has a choice. Remove him now, or Phoenix Enterprises will initiate a hostile takeover at market open tomorrow. And I will personally ensure that every single one of you who stands by him shares his fate." It was checkmate. The board motivated by the one creed Adrien had ever taught them. Ruthless self-interest did not hesitate. The vote was swift, brutal, and unanimous. He was out. As security guards, the very men who served his will moments before gently but firmly escorted the broken man from the stage. His vacant eyes met Anya's. He saw no triumph in her gaze, no gloating, only the placid, unyielding finality of a debt that had finally been paid in full. The king had been deposed not by a rival army, but by the queen he had created in the crucible of his own cruelty. In the end, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation. Anya Sharma, the woman born from Isabella Blackwood's ashes, didn't just take his company. She built a better one. Phoenix Enterprises under her leadership became a titan of industry, known not just for its innovation, but for its ethical practices. She proved that success doesn't have to be paved with the ruin of others. Adrien Blackwood faded into obscurity, a modern-day Lear raging against the storm of his own making his name a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. Anya never denied Leo the truth of who his father was, but she taught him that a name doesn't define a man. His actions do. She had disappeared with nothing but the child he rejected, and returned with the one thing he could never understand. A strength that wasn't built on power, but on love. What did you think of Anya's ultimate checkmate? Was it justice, or was it a revenge as cold as his own heart? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of betrayal and triumph, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a story of epic payback, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more tales of dramatic revenge and ultimate justice. Your support allows us to keep bringing you these stories. Click that subscribe button now, and we'll see you in the next video. Andrew Smith was never the type of man you'd expect to abandon his wife, especially not on the very day she was giving birth to his child. He had always been the charming, dependable one, the man every neighbor in Glendale admired. But hidden beneath the surface was a secret that would upend more than one life. While Jessica labored alone in a sterile hospital room, Andrew was elsewhere, exchanging vows with his mistress. In that moment, he believed he was chasing true happiness. Little did he know that 3 years later, regret would strike harder than he could have ever imagined. Andrew Smith grew up in a tight-knit family on the outskirts of Glendale, California. His parents, Richard and Monique Smith, were known in their neighborhood for their unwavering devotion to one another. They had weathered life's storms, financial troubles, his mother's illness, and the struggles of raising 3 children without ever letting their bond break. Andrew was the middle child, neither the high-achieving eldest like his brother Marcus, nor the gentle artistic youngest like his sister Abigail. But if anyone were to ask, Andrew was the most driven. He had big dreams of becoming an entrepreneur, owning a chain of successful coffee shops, and perhaps settling into a comfortable life surrounded by friends and family. He met Jessica Perez while attending Glendale Community College. Jessica was studying early childhood education, determined to become a teacher. She was the kind of woman who cared deeply, not just for children, but for every person she encountered. Her warmth attracted Andrew from the start, and within weeks they had become inseparable. Jessica's friends teased that she was drawn to Andrew's ambition and quick wit, while Andrew's siblings noted how Jessica's calm demeanor tempered his restless spirit. 2 years into their relationship, they got married in a small ceremony at Jessica's grandparents' ranch in Santa Clarita. Their union was the picture of young love, pure optimistic, and buoyed by big plans for the future. Andrew had just opened his first coffee shop, Glendale Grounds, a modest storefront, but bustling with potential. Jessica found a job at a local preschool, shaping young minds by day and supporting Andrew's dreams at night. For the first few years, they were blissfully unaware of the cracks forming beneath the surface. Andrew's relentless drive led him to expand Glendale grounds. Soon he had 2, then 3 locations. He was often away working long hours, traveling to find new coffee suppliers or attending seminars. Jessica's teaching schedule was also rigorous, but she always made time for date nights and quiet moments, trying to keep the flame alive. Yet with each new coffee shop, Andrew drifted further. He started missing dinner more frequently. Jessica felt his absence acutely, but she never truly believed it could be anything more than the stress of a growing business. Little did either of them know a single chance meeting in his flagship store would begin to unravel their once happy union. Cynthia Mills was a freelance marketing consultant and an undeniable force of nature. She had moved to Glendale just months prior, attracted by the city's blossoming business scene. Cynthia was known for her polished presentations, cunning strategies, and a confidence that was utterly magnetic. If Cynthia wanted something, she typically found a way to get it. The day Andrew and Cynthia met was unremarkable at first glance. Cynthia strolled into Glendale Grounds' flagship location with a laptop under her arm. She ordered a double espresso and settled into a corner table, preparing to work on a proposal for another client. Andrew happened to be there going through paperwork, observing baristas, and chatting with regulars. Cynthia was exactly the type of clientele he'd hoped to attract, business-minded, sophisticated, and obviously discerning in her taste. She caught his eye, not merely because she was strikingly beautiful, though she was, but because she exuded the kind of sharp energy Andrew believed could propel his business to greater heights. He introduced himself, offered to refill her espresso on the house, and struck up a conversation. Before he knew it, they were discussing potential brand partnerships, ways to streamline social media campaigns, and expansions into other neighborhoods. Cynthia's proposals were fresh and innovative, precisely what Andrew needed to stay ahead of the competition. Impressed by her ideas, Andrew set up a formal meeting the following week to discuss a possible collaboration. One meeting turned into several. Cynthia spent long hours at the cafe, often working alongside Andrew in the back office. She noticed his every gesture, the way he fiddled with his pen when concentrating, the soft smile he wore when discussing his passion for coffee, the charismatic flair he brought to every interaction. Gradually, her professional admiration shifted into something more personal, and Andrew, who had long been starved for excitement outside of routine business tasks, found himself drawn to Cynthia's brilliance and boldness. Jessica was vaguely aware of a new consultant in Andrew's life. He mentioned her sporadically. Cynthia had a great idea today, or Cynthia thinks we should rebrand the logo. Jessica, trusting and supportive, never suspected anything. She remained confident in her husband's loyalty and saw Cynthia purely as a boon to Andrew's business. But with each late-night strategy session and business trip, the lines between professional collaboration and personal intrigue blurred. Andrew was at the precipice, unaware that one misstep could send him careening into an affair that would shatter the world he and Jessica had built. Things took a sharp turn on a trip to San Francisco, where Andrew and Cynthia attended a coffee and marketing convention. Jessica couldn't accompany him. Her teaching responsibilities were demanding, and she was in the early stages of pregnancy. Delighted by the news of becoming a father, Andrew was initially conflicted about traveling at such a crucial time, but Jessica encouraged him to go and grow his business. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event," she said, stroking her belly. "You have to do what you can to make Glendale Grounds a success." In San Francisco, Andrew and Cynthia's professional rapport escalated into something undeniably personal. After a long day of presentations and networking, they found themselves at the hotel bar savoring a glass of wine. Talk of marketing and coffee beans gave way to deeper conversations about fears ambitions and regrets. Cynthia confided that she'd been in a string of unfulfilling relationships and was tired of men who lacked vision. Andrew admitted he often felt lonely despite being surrounded by employees and customers. He talked about Jessica's pregnancy with pride, but also confessed to feeling anxious about the looming responsibilities. One glass of wine led to another, and the tension between them crackled like static in the air. When Andrew escorted Cynthia back to her hotel room, he lingered at the door a moment too long. That was all the invitation Cynthia needed. A fleeting moment of weakness culminated in a passionate night that neither could deny nor undo. The following morning, Andrew was overcome by guilt and panic. Cynthia attempted to reassure him that they could keep their affair discreet. But Andrew found himself trapped between two worlds, the loyal husband about to become a father, and the ambitious entrepreneur enthralled by a woman who sparked excitement in his otherwise predictable routine. He convinced himself that this was a one-time lapse in judgment, a mistake he would bury deep. When he returned to Glendale, Andrew promised himself to break things off with Cynthia and refocus on Jessica and the upcoming baby. Yet, as any forbidden romance tends to do, the allure only grew stronger. Back home, Cynthia continued working closely with Andrew, and the emotional tie they had forged wouldn't simply disappear. Jessica, meanwhile, began experiencing complications in her pregnancy, further occupying her mind and time. Andrew found himself torn in two, helplessly wanting to be a devoted husband, but too addicted to the fire of his illicit connection with Cynthia. Jessica's pregnancy was marked by both excitement and worry. At her 20-week ultrasound, the doctor detected some minor complications. Though not life-threatening, she was advised to reduce stress rest often and attend frequent checkups. Jessica did her best to follow these instructions, though it meant cutting back on her teaching responsibilities. Her colleagues at the preschool were understanding, sending her well wishes and covering her classes. Andrew appeared supportive, at first driving her to the hospital for appointments, making sure she took her vitamins, and promising to make time for her, despite his hectic schedule. But unbeknownst to Jessica, Andrew's emotional investment had veered dangerously off course. He was juggling phone calls from Cynthia, who pitched new ideas and invited him to after-hours networking events. On the outside, Andrew maintained a facade, a husband still engaged in his wife's well-being, a businessman forging ahead. On the inside, he was spiraling. Late one night, Jessica noticed Andrew texting surreptitiously. She confronted him, albeit gently worried that he might be overworking. He brushed it off, claiming that a supplier had changed terms at the last minute, forcing him into crisis mode. Jessica chose to believe him. After all, Andrew had never before given her a reason to doubt him. She wanted to cling to the image of the devoted man she married. However, Jessica wasn't entirely oblivious. She sensed Andrew's distance, the way he seemed perpetually lost in thought. She tried to bridge the gap by planning a romantic dinner at home, decorating the living room with fairy lights, and cooking his favorite meal, creamy mushroom pasta. Andrew appreciated the gesture, but the intimacy felt strained. Where once they would have fallen into comfortable conversation, now silences hung heavy. Jessica chalked it up to business stress and her own pregnancy-related mood swings, hoping time would realign them. Cynthia, for her part, was not inclined to stay in the shadows. Initially, she told Andrew she was content with secrecy, but as her feelings deepened, so did her aspirations. She wanted Andrew fully not in stolen moments. She started leaving voice messages, hinting at a life they could share. She began dropping by Glendale grounds, unannounced, claiming business emergencies. Slowly she planted herself in Andrew's world, making it impossible for him to avoid her or hide her presence from prying eyes. With each day, the weight of Andrew's deception grew heavier, even as Jessica's due date grew closer. The delicate balance he thought he could maintain was teetering dangerously one misstep away from collapsing and crushing everything in its path. As Jessica entered her final trimester, her health became increasingly fragile. Doctors' visits became weekly routines. She was ordered to spend more time on bed rest, limiting her mobility. During this period, Andrew tried to be more present, yet every moment of solace Jessica found in Andrew's support was counterbalanced by the haunting sense that his mind was elsewhere. In the midst of this tension, Glendale Grounds was about to open its 4th branch, a massive milestone for Andrew's business. Local media, including the Glendale Register, planned to cover the grand opening, raising the cafe's profile in the community. Jessica wanted to celebrate Andrew's success. She urged him to invite friends, family, and staff to a soft launch party. Despite her limited mobility, she coordinated with Andrew's sister Abigail to decorate the new location. She even crafted handwritten invitations for the staff, praising their hard work. Cynthia was of course involved in every aspect of the marketing campaign for the new branch. Jessica and Cynthia finally met briefly at the soft launch. Cynthia appeared graceful, poised, and every bit the professional marketing consultant. Jessica thanked her for all the contributions she'd made to Andrew's venture. Cynthia smiled politely, exchanging pleasantries, but internally seethed with envy at Jessica's rightful place beside Andrew. Meanwhile, Andrew, feeling trapped between the two women, found it difficult to hide his anxiety. Complicating matters further, Andrew's parents, Richard and Monique, stopped by the new cafe. Richard pulled Andrew aside, noticing his son's strained expression. "You all right, son?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. Andrew forced a smile, insisting everything was fine. Monique fussed over Jessica, offering to help with the pregnancy in any way she could. Andrew felt pangs of shame. He remembered how his parents had stood by each other, through thick and thin, their unwavering devotion, a beacon for him growing up. Here he was, their son, betraying that same devotion, with each secret text message and clandestine encounter. The soft launch, while a public success, only amplified Andrew's private turmoil. Cynthia cornered him after the event, pressing him about their future. Jessica, though physically weary, radiated pride in her husband's achievement. Andrew once believed that forging a double life might give him the best of both worlds. Unfortunately, it had only opened a chasm in his soul. The pressure was mounting. Jessica was due any day now, and Andrew felt caught in a riptide of deceit. He failed to realize just how viciously it would tear him from the shore when the time came. Jessica's labor came earlier than expected, 3 weeks before her due date. She had been reclining on the sofa reading a parenting magazine when a sharp pain seized her. Alarmed, she called Andrew, who was at the new cafe with Cynthia, for a staff meeting. He answered, but was distracted, telling Jessica he'd be there soon. Cynthia overheard the conversation, her eyebrows arching, as she realized Jessica was in labor. Jessica's contractions intensified rapidly. She called her sister-in-law Abigail, who rushed over to help her to the hospital. The on-call physician, Dr. Clara Alvarez, examined Jessica and confirmed the baby was on its way, though she also warned that Jessica's blood pressure was dangerously high. Jessica was in tears, partly from the pain, but mostly from the fear that Andrew hadn't arrived yet. Abigail tried to calm her, promising that Andrew would be there any minute. Across town, Andrew felt the intensity of Cynthia's gaze. She watched him with an almost predatory interest as he hung up the phone. Instead of rushing to Jessica, he hesitated, caught in a bizarre swirl of emotions. Cynthia seized the moment to convince him that maybe their love was meant to be that Jessica's pregnancy had never truly kept him by her side. Andrew was vulnerable, exhausted by the months of lies, and he found himself listening to Cynthia's every word. What Andrew did next was unimaginable. Instead of driving to the hospital, he accompanied Cynthia to a courthouse in Van Nuys. Cynthia had orchestrated it perfectly, claiming they needed to make their relationship official if Andrew truly wanted to break free from the charade of his failing marriage. It was a reckless act spurred by emotions and illusions. Andrew, guilt-ridden, yet seduced by the idea of a fresh start, succumbed to Cynthia's plan. In a haze, he signed the necessary paperwork, exchanging vows in a rushed civil ceremony, while Jessica was enduring labor pains. At Glendale Memorial Hospital, Jessica was wheeled into the delivery room. Her blood pressure continued to climb, and the baby's heart rate spiked, alarming the medical team. Monique and Richard arrived, desperately calling Andrew's phone, but he never picked up. Jessica sobbed, asking for her husband, longing for him to hold her hand. Abigail insisted that Andrew must be stuck in traffic or dealing with an emergency. Behind the curtains, Dr. Alvarez prepared for a possible C-section if Jessica's condition worsened. Outside, a thunderstorm gathered over Glendale, mirroring the tumult within Jessica's heart. Jessica gave birth to a daughter, Amelia Rose Smith, at 2:45 a.m. The medical team managed to stabilize Jessica's blood pressure, and after a tense few hours, both mother and baby were safe. Yet the momentous joy of welcoming Amelia into the world was marred by Andrew's absence. He was nowhere to be found, and no one had heard from him since earlier that day. While Jessica clung to her newborn, tears slid down her cheeks. The only reassurance she had was Abigail's gentle voice telling her that everything would be all right. Deep down, Jessica felt a sinking dread. Was Andrew hurt, or had he chosen to abandon her at her most vulnerable hour? In reality, Andrew was in a small, nondescript hotel room with Cynthia. The gravity of his decision weighed on him like an anvil, each heartbeat reminding him of the irreversible vow he'd just made. Cynthia, on the other hand, celebrated triumph. She interpreted Andrew's impulsive compliance as proof of his undying affection, ignoring the guilt plainly etched on his face. Morning dawned, and Andrew's phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and frantic voicemails. When he finally listened, the words emergency hospital and birth hammered at his heart. Unsteady and nauseous, he told Cynthia he had to see Jessica to make sure she and the baby were all right. Cynthia tried to stall him, insisting that seeing Jessica now would compromise their newly minted marriage certificate. But Andrew couldn't ignore the fact that a tiny human, his daughter, had come into the world without him. By the time Andrew arrived at Glendale Memorial, Jessica was awake and painfully aware of his betrayal. Rumors had spread. Staff whispered about a tearful father missing in action. Jessica's sister, Abigail, confronted Andrew in the hallway, practically hissing, "Where were you?" Jessica nearly lost her life. Andrew mumbled an excuse about legal complications at the cafe, but Abigail wasn't buying it. Even Andrew's parents looked on him with disbelief and disappointment. Andrew entered Jessica's room cautiously. She lay there pale and exhausted, holding Amelia protectively against her chest. Jessica looked up at him, tears in her eyes, and asked why Andrew had no coherent answer. He simply stood there, overwhelmed by regret, by the tiny bundle in Jessica's arms, by the knowledge that he had just done something that might rip apart everything he once held dear. In that moment, a single thought crystallized in Andrew's mind. The life he had chosen would not be easy to live with. The hospital room was dimly lit, cast in soft yellow light, the scent of antiseptic still lingering in the air. Jessica lay in bed, pale and exhausted, her newborn daughter swaddled gently in her arms. Amelia's tiny chest rose and fell against her mother's heartbeat, oblivious to the chaos that had unfolded outside the womb. Jessica's arms trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emotional overload. Her lips were chapped, her cheeks tear-streaked. The nurses moved quietly around her, avoiding questions they had no answers to. There was only one question that mattered to Jessica, now the one that clung to every breath. Where was Andrew? He hadn't come. He hadn't even called. And despite her attempts to convince herself that something must have happened, an accident, a family emergency, anything, a cold and terrifying truth began to settle in her bones. He had chosen not to be there. 3 days later, Jessica was discharged, but she didn't go home. Instead, Richard and Monique Andrews' parents insisted she come stay with them. "You shouldn't be alone right now," Monique had said, placing a warm hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Not with a newborn. Not after this." Jessica had nodded, silently grateful, and broken in equal measure. Their house, once filled with laughter, from Sunday brunches and baby name debates, was now wrapped in an awkward, suffocating quiet. Jessica did her best to keep to herself, tending to Amelia's every need with near-obsessive precision, feeding, changing, rocking her to sleep, repeating the cycle. She found solace in the rhythm of motherhood, even if her own heart was in pieces. Each time Amelia looked up at her with wide, curious eyes, Jessica whispered, "You are enough. We are enough." Andrew didn't show his face until nearly a week later. He arrived at the front door of his parents' home, disheveled and gaunt, holding a small bouquet of tulips and an oversized teddy bear. Monique opened the door and said nothing. She simply stepped aside, allowing her son to walk into the lion's den of his own making. Jessica was in the living room, nursing Amelia under a soft blanket. When she saw him, her entire body stiffened. He stood there frozen. "I'm sorry," he said. Jessica didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on Amelia, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "I know I should have been there. Everything got out of control." Her voice came out like a whisper, sharp and laced with pain. "You weren't just not there, Andrew. You were with her. You married her." The silence that followed felt heavier than grief. "I didn't plan it," Andrew muttered. "It was a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing." Jessica's head snapped up. Her voice rose for the first time in days. "You made vows, Andrew. Vows to me. To us. And then you made more vows while I was screaming in a hospital bed, giving birth to your daughter, alone." Andrew's lip trembled. "I didn't think no," she snapped. "You didn't. You never thought about me. Or her." She stood still, holding Amelia close, and moved past him. The bouquet dropped from Andrew's hand, hitting the floor like a symbol of something wilted long before it ever bloomed. That night, Andrew stayed outside in his car for hours. Inside, Monique and Richard sat in the kitchen, staring into mugs of untouched tea. Richard finally spoke. "He's our son. But what he did, it's unforgivable." Monique sighed. "And yet that's our granddaughter in there, and she deserves better than silence and shame." Days passed, then weeks. Andrew began visiting more often, not as a partner, but as a fractured man grasping at fatherhood. He held Amelia cautiously, as though afraid she'd sense the weight of his sins. Jessica never left the room. She watched him like a hawk, not out of jealousy or possessiveness, but from a deep-seated need to protect her daughter from any more lies. Eventually, Andrew confessed. He told her about the courthouse, about the rushed vows, about Cynthia's manipulation, but he didn't tell the whole truth. He left out how willingly he'd followed Cynthia to that courthouse, how willingly he had signed that paper. He painted himself as confused, as swept up, as pressured. Jessica saw through it. "You weren't confused," she said bitterly. "You were selfish. You saw a shiny new life, and you ran toward it. You left me bleeding and scared so you could chase a fantasy." Andrew's shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. "You're right. But I want to fix it." "You can't fix this, Andrew," she replied coldly. "You can't unmake that choice." Then came Cynthia's retaliation. When Andrew began mentioning annulment, Cynthia refused. She threatened legal action. She claimed she was pregnant. She demanded financial support. And she made one thing clear: she would not be erased. Andrew was now legally married to Cynthia and trapped. Jessica, stuck in legal limbo, couldn't even call herself a divorced woman. Technically, she was still married to a man who now belonged, at least on paper, to someone else. The weight of it all became unbearable. Maria urged Jessica to lawyer up. Abigail offered to help with court filings. Even Monique, once silent, told Jessica, "You deserve peace no matter what it takes." And amid all this, Amelia began to smile for the first time. Jessica wept that day, not because of joy, but because she finally realized how much she'd been holding in. Her daughter was growing. Time was moving. And Jessica, she had a choice to make. She could stay tangled in Andrew's chaos, or she could begin building a life where she was no longer collateral damage, but the foundation of something new. A few months later, Jessica resumed a semblance of normalcy for Amelia's sake. She moved out of her in-laws' home and into a small apartment near her old preschool. With the help of her sister-in-law, Abigail, she began piecing together a new life. She returned to part-time, teaching her colleagues, offering a supportive embrace during her darkest hours. Everyone in Glendale had heard the gossip Andrew Smith had married his mistress while his wife was giving birth. The story circulated in hushed tones at church gatherings, local cafes ironically, including Glendale grounds, and at the preschool playground. Andrew found himself at odds with Cynthia more frequently than he could have anticipated. Their marriage, born of secrecy and impulsivity, lacked a foundation of trust or genuine companionship. Cynthia wanted Andrew's undivided attention, but his guilt pulled him toward Amelia. He tried to be present in Amelia's life, scheduling visits, under the watchful eye of Jessica's disapproving family. Every time he held his daughter, an ache stabbed his heart, reminding him of the home and love he had forsaken. This was not the fresh start he'd imagined. It was a tangled web of regret and half-truths. As Jessica adjusted to single motherhood, she found unexpected solace in therapy sessions offered through her school's counseling program. Talking to a professional helped her process her heartbreak, anger, and lingering doubts. She admitted she still loved Andrew, or at least the man he used to be, but she couldn't reconcile that memory with the person he'd become. Could she ever forgive him? That question loomed without a clear answer. One day, Jessica received an unexpected visitor at her apartment, Marcus Andrews' older brother. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, Marcus delivered a blunt assessment. He believed Andrew had fallen under Cynthia's manipulative spell. Yet he also observed that Andrew was an adult who had knowingly walked into that relationship. Marcus wanted Jessica to be informed about the legal complexities. He offered to help her find a lawyer to clarify custody arrangements and child support. Andrew, he said, could not dodge his parental responsibilities, even if he was entangled in another marriage. Jessica appreciated the gesture, though it pained her that everything now had to be formalized in legal documents. Through all this, Amelia's presence was the one shining light. The baby giggled, learned to roll over, grabbed at Jessica's fingers and cooed with a pure love that transcended adult betrayals. Jessica clung to that innocence, determined to protect her daughter from the storm Andrew had unleashed. As the first year of Amelia's life unfolded, Andrew's internal conflict intensified. He had tried to negotiate an annulment with Cynthia, but she stonewalled him, demanding a large financial settlement. Cynthia had grown more possessive, possibly realizing that the rush of victory from winning Andrew was fleeting if he remained emotionally distant. Desperate, Andrew sought the counsel of a divorce attorney, Joseph Brandt, who laid out the grim possibilities. Since Andrew and Cynthia had legally married, dissolving the union would be costly and complicated. Given that Cynthia was not simply walking away, the matter could drag on for years if contested. Andrew's mind spun at the prospect. Glendale grounds, though profitable, might not withstand a legal war. And then there was Jessica and Amelia. He wanted to be there for them, to provide a comfortable life for his daughter. But each passing day felt like the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, Jessica grew stronger in her independence. She threw herself into teaching with Amelia as her primary motivation. The more she focused on her own life, the clearer it became that Andrew's choices were out of her control. Though she felt pangs of love and sorrow, she knew a future with him now came with heavy baggage named Cynthia. Cynthia, unrelenting, tried to mold Andrew into a trophy husband. She insisted he attend galas, marketing seminars, and social events that she organized. She wanted to showcase her success. Look, I have the most sought-after entrepreneur in Glendale by my side, but Andrew's heart wasn't in it. He would plaster on a polite smile for photographs, while silently yearning to be reading bedtime stories to Amelia or checking on Jessica's well-being. One evening, Andrew decided to slip away from a networking event to drive by Jessica's apartment. As he parked outside, he saw the soft glow of lamplight through the window. Inside, Jessica was cradling Amelia, singing a lullaby. Andrew felt an almost physical pain, an overwhelming wave of regret and sorrow. He realized that in chasing a reckless fantasy, he had lost the chance to be a father to his daughter in all those little day-to-day ways that truly mattered. That night, Andrew didn't step out of his car. He just watched quietly, tears threatening to spill. He realized that no matter what legal or financial battles lay ahead, he would need to do something drastic to rectify or at least mitigate the damage he had done. The question was, how much was he willing to sacrifice to make things right? It began with a phone call. Jessica had just returned from the grocery store, balancing a squirming Amelia on one hip and a bag of produce on the other, when her phone rang. The caller ID was unfamiliar, Elena Collins, it read. Jessica hesitated for a beat before answering. Ms. Perez, the voice on the other end, was smooth, almost apologetic. I'm Elena Collins from the Glendale Register. I'm working on a feature story regarding Andrew Smith, the founder of Glendale Grounds. We've received several anonymous tips that his personal life may have intersected with his business decisions. Would you be open to an interview? Jessica froze. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the first time she'd felt the heat of whispers following her at the preschool or sensed stares at the park playground. But this was different. This was the press. This was exposure. I'm sorry, I'm not interested, she said, her voice clipped but polite. Please don't call me again. Jessica hung up and stared at the floor, her heart pounding. Her daughter clung to her, sensing her mother's tension. She kissed Amelia's forehead and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're okay." But they weren't. The next day, the headline exploded across the internet. Cafe King's secret vows. A tale of betrayal and big business. Jessica's photo, taken from her old Facebook profile, was plastered beside Andrew's and Cynthia's. The article was filled with speculation, anonymous sources, and just enough truth to make it impossible to ignore. It detailed Andrew's courthouse wedding, on the day Jessica gave birth, the existence of Cynthia in Glendale Grounds operations, and even claimed that Cynthia was now pregnant with Andrew's second child. Jessica sat at her kitchen table, the newspaper trembling in her hands. Her coffee had gone cold. Her heart felt as if it had been ripped from her chest and laid bare for the entire town to dissect. The shame, the humiliation, it all came crashing down. At the preschool, parents gave her sympathetic looks, cloaked in curiosity. At the grocery store, strangers whispered behind aisle displays. Jessica did her best to hold her head high, but inside she was unraveling. She felt stripped of her privacy dignity and the little stability she had built over the last year. Later that week, Maria, her outspoken cousin, burst into Jessica's apartment. "You have to respond," Maria said, throwing the newspaper on the counter. "You can't let her control the narrative. You can't let people think you are the problem." "I don't care what they think," Jessica whispered, staring blankly at the window. "I care about Amelia." Maria's voice softened. "And Amelia will grow up Googling her parents one day. Do you want her to find this and think you were silent because you had something to be ashamed of?" Jessica blinked back tears. "I was in labor. He was marrying someone else. What else is there to say?" Meanwhile, Andrew was spiraling. Glendale Grounds had started to suffer. Once a local darling of artisanal charm and community pride, the cafes were now haunted by the scandal. Long-time customers boycotted the stores. Business partners pulled out of potential collaborations. His inbox was flooded with emails, some cruel, some disappointed, a few supportive but all overwhelming. In private, Andrew seethed, not at Jessica, not even at the media. He seethed at himself for letting it get this far, for trusting Cynthia, for believing that a woman who craved power could ever be satisfied with love. He confronted Cynthia one night, demanding to know if the pregnancy rumors were true. "Are you pregnant or not?" He barked. Cynthia smiled lazily, swirling her wine in a glass. "That's none of your business, darling, unless you plan to take responsibility. Don't play games." She leaned in her voice like poison-laced silk. "You made me a promise, Andrew. You left your wife. You married me. And now you're embarrassed because people know the truth, poor Andrew. The world's seeing who you really are." He stormed out. Desperate to reclaim some control, Andrew messaged Jessica. "Can I come by just to talk, after Amelia's asleep? I need to explain." Jessica stared at the message for a long time before replying, "1 hour. Don't be late." That evening, the atmosphere in her apartment was charged and tense. Amelia was asleep in her crib. The quiet hum of the baby monitor filled the silence between them. Andrew looked worn older, paler, beaten down by headlines and regret. He took off his coat and stood awkwardly near the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry," he began. Jessica folded her arms. "You've said that before." "I know, but this time I mean it without expecting anything in return. I want to tell the truth." He explained everything. The legal mess, Cynthia's manipulation, the pregnancy lie, he still hadn't seen any proof, and his failing business. "I'm trying to get out. I'm trying to fight for custody, for annulment, for everything, but Cynthia's playing a dangerous game." Jessica watched him closely. "And you're not," his shoulders slumped. "I was. But I'm not anymore, I swear. I don't want Cynthia. I don't want that life. I just want to be a father to Amelia. I want to help raise her, to give her stability, and maybe one day to deserve a second chance." Jessica said nothing at first. Then, in a low voice, "You missed your daughter's birth, Andrew. You didn't just break a vow, you broke a moment. And that's something you can never get back, I know," he whispered, "and I live with it every single day." He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can be more than what I was." Jessica stared at him for a long moment. For her sake, she said, "You'd better be." That night when Andrew left, Jessica didn't feel resolved or healed. But she did feel a shift, something real, however small. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something new, accountability. And for once, Andrew didn't run from it. The following weeks turned into a seesaw of emotions. Jessica allowed Andrew scheduled visits with Amelia, making him promise not to bring Cynthia. Andrew complied, driving over after work to spend a couple of hours with his daughter, reading picture books or simply watching her play. Amelia, unburdened by adult conflicts, giggled and squealed, reaching out her tiny arms for her father. Each visit filled Andrew with a bittersweet mixture of joy and remorse. Meanwhile, Cynthia launched her own campaign. She began appearing unannounced at Glendale grounds, making public scenes whenever Andrew tried to avoid her. On one occasion, she threw a coffee mug against the wall, shattering it, and screamed about Andrew's betrayal. Staff members exchanged looks of alarm. Andrew was forced to ask Cynthia to leave, but she threatened a lawsuit for emotional distress. It was the kind of drama that neither Andrew nor his employees could contain. Word spread further, tarnishing the cafe's reputation. In a desperate attempt at damage control, Andrew considered selling Glendale grounds entirely, or at least transferring ownership to remove himself from the public eye. Yet something in him resisted, letting go of the dream he had poured so much effort into. That dream, after all, had once been shared by Jessica. He wasn't ready to abandon it, not unless there was no other choice. Simultaneously, Jessica faced her own set of dilemmas. She had found a new sense of self after Andrew's betrayal, an independence that, while painful, was also empowering. The question lingered, did she want Andrew back in her life, beyond his role as Amelia's father? Could she love him again? Did she even want to friends? And family weighed in most urging caution. Jessica's cousin Maria told her not to risk her heart again. Abigail, torn by loyalty to both her brother and Jessica, simply said she would support any decision Jessica made. Despite the well-intentioned counsel, Jessica knew the choice was ultimately hers alone. One late evening, after putting Amelia to bed, Jessica scrolled through old photos on her phone, pictures of her and Andrew during their college days, smiling in front of Glendale grounds, first storefront arms wrapped around each other. Tears stung her eyes. It was amazing how quickly a life could change, how swiftly a dream could become a nightmare. Yet a flicker of hope refused to extinguish a persistent memory of the Andrew she used to know thoughtful, determined loving. If that Andrew still existed somewhere beneath the wreckage, perhaps redemption was possible, but only if he was willing to fight for it. Andrew finally took a decisive step. He served Cynthia with divorce papers. The day he handed them to her in the Glendale grounds office, she burst into a violent rage, knocking over a display of coffee bags and hurling a stream of curses his way. Cynthia vowed to destroy Andrew's reputation, to drag him through the courts, and to take every penny he had. Andrew steeled himself, knowing it could get ugly, but he also felt a sense of relief for having chosen a path, no matter how perilous. Cynthia's next move was to go public. She scheduled an interview with Elena Collins, the same journalist from the Glendale Register, to tell her side of the story. In a lengthy exposé, Cynthia painted Andrew as a manipulative cheater who promised her marriage and then threw her aside. She claimed to be pregnant, though she provided no medical proof. She also cast aspersions on Jessica, insinuating that Jessica had driven Andrew into Cynthia's arms by being too controlling and needy. The article spread like wildfire, spurring heated debates in social media groups and local forums. Glendale grounds faced more boycotts, and Andrew's personal phone was inundated with hateful messages. Despite the chaos, Jessica noticed something different about Andrew. He no longer wavered. He attended every court hearing, every mediation, prepared to stand up for himself. He publicly declared Cynthia's allegations false, challenging her to present evidence of her supposed pregnancy. Moreover, he consistently showed up for Amelia, never missing a scheduled visit. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Andrew was finally taking responsibility for his actions, rather than hiding. At one court hearing, Cynthia arrived with a lawyer, but still no proof of pregnancy. The judge grew impatient, demanding to see medical records. Cynthia tried to stall, claiming she needed more time. Andrew's lawyer seized the opportunity to highlight her lack of credibility. Outside the courtroom, Andrew and Jessica found themselves briefly alone. Andrew thanked Jessica for not attacking him in the press. Jessica responded that she wanted Amelia to grow up respecting both parents if possible. "You made the choices that led us here," she said, eyes brimming with both sadness and a hint of compassion. "But I don't want this to end in endless hatred. It's bad for Amelia." That conversation lingered in Andrew's mind. For the first time since the fiasco began, he felt a tiny measure of hope, not necessarily that Jessica would take him back, but that perhaps they could move forward in a healthier way. Even as Cynthia's fury promised more storms ahead, Andrew stood firm. He realized he might be too late to fix the damage he had done, but for Amelia's sake, and perhaps for Jessica's, he wanted to try. A few more months rolled by, bringing both relief and new challenges. The court compelled Cynthia to submit to a medical examination. The results proved she was not pregnant, confirming Andrew's suspicion that the pregnancy was a fabrication to maintain control. Incensed by being caught in her lie, Cynthia ramped up her intimidation tactics. She threatened to reveal intimate details about her and Andrew's affair, claiming she had photos and messages that would mortify him. Andrew's lawyer countered with a cease and desist letter, warning Cynthia that releasing any private content without consent could open her to legal consequences. The tension simmered, but for the moment, Cynthia's threats remained just that, threats. Meanwhile, Jessica witnessed Andrew's transformation more clearly. He had stepped back from the daily operations of Glendale grounds, delegating responsibilities to a trusted management team so he could focus on his legal battles and personal life. During his visits with Amelia, he was attentive, patient, and genuinely engaged. He even attended a few of Jessica's therapy sessions to work on co-parenting strategies. Though far from perfect, he was making real efforts to repair what he could. Yet the question still lingered: could they reconcile romantically? Jessica wrestled with that uncertainty. In therapy, she admitted that while she saw positive changes, the betrayal ran deep. She worried about setting a dangerous precedent, that she might inadvertently teach Amelia that it was okay to accept infidelity or abandonment. On the other hand, she recognized that people could change if they truly confronted their wrongdoing. She didn't want to bury her own capacity for forgiveness. Andrew, for his part, didn't push. He asked Jessica if they could go on a walk together with Amelia in her stroller, just to talk. Jessica agreed, and they met on a sunny afternoon at Verdugo Park. They strolled beneath leafy trees, making small talk at first about Amelia's feeding habits, her new obsession with a plush teddy bear. Gradually, the conversation turned more serious. Andrew spoke candidly about his regret, his foolishness in thinking Cynthia was the thrill he needed. He confessed that the life he truly wanted was the one he'd thrown away, but he accepted that getting it back might never happen. He just hoped Jessica would see that he was genuinely remorseful. They ended the walk by a small pond where ducks gathered. Amelia squealed at the sight of them reaching out her chubby arms. Jessica looked at Andrew, who held Amelia's tiny hand, and for a fleeting moment, the scene felt familiar, like an echo of the family they were supposed to be. Jessica felt a twinge of longing. Maybe they could chart a new path. But neither of them spoke that thought aloud, uncertain of how to proceed without reopening old wounds. 3 years had passed since that fateful day Jessica went into labor. 3 years since Andrew made the catastrophic decision to marry his mistress while his pregnant wife lay in a hospital bed. The legal processes dragged on, but at last, a weary judge granted Andrew a divorce from Cynthia, citing fraud as the primary cause. Cynthia vanished from Glendale shortly after leaving behind a trail of rumors and unpaid debts. Glendale grounds, weathering an initial slump, rebounded under a new marketing campaign, and a sympathetic public who found Andrew's renewed humility more palatable than his previous brash ambition. Amelia was now a rambunctious toddler, her curly hair framing a mischievous smile. She bounded around Jessica's small apartment, filling the rooms with laughter. Andrew visited often, sharing meals and reading bedtime stories. He never stayed overnight, respecting Jessica's emotional boundaries, but he was there. And it made all the difference to Amelia, whose face lit up whenever he walked through the door. Andrew and Jessica had been slowly, cautiously inching toward reconciliation. They enrolled in a co-parenting class, which transitioned into a couples counseling program once Jessica felt stable enough to consider rebuilding their relationship. Their counselor, Dr. Samantha Lee, guided them through trust exercises and long, sometimes painful dialogues. Andrew owned his mistakes with sincerity that Jessica had never seen before. Jessica spoke her truth, explaining the deep wounds left by his betrayal. She set firm boundaries about honesty and accountability. Little by little, the walls cracked. On Amelia's 3rd birthday, they threw a small party in Jessica's new rental house, a modest but cozy place with a backyard. Family and close friends gathered, including Andrew's parents, Jessica's cousins, and a handful of their old college friends. Balloons dotted the fence line, and a homemade chocolate cake sat on the picnic table. Jessica stood by the grill flipping hamburgers, while Andrew chased Amelia around the yard, both shrieking with laughter. In a quiet moment, Jessica's cousin Maria approached, gave her a hug, and whispered, "I've never seen you smile like this since before everything happened. You look happy." Jessica realized she was happy at least in that fleeting moment. After the guests left, and the yard was littered with wrapping paper, Andrew helped Jessica put Amelia to bed. They read her a new storybook about a family of bears who lose their way and find each other again. Amelia nodded off, her little fist wrapped around Andrew's finger. Jessica and Andrew stood there, watching their daughter sleep, the moonlight casting a soft glow on Amelia's rosy cheeks. Andrew turned to Jessica, tears brimming in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice trembling. "For everything." In that quiet moment, Jessica placed her hand gently on his cheek. She didn't say the words, "I forgive you," because forgiveness was an ongoing journey. But the gesture was enough to let Andrew know that at last there was a path forward. A path that involved acknowledging the past while daring to hope for a better future together. Though 3 years had already passed since the day Andrew married his mistress, the full weight of his regret would linger well beyond that timeline. Each milestone, Amelia's first words, her first steps, her first day of preschool, reminded him of the moments he nearly forfeited. He often lay awake at night, tormented by vivid memories of Jessica in that hospital bed, crying out for him, while he was somewhere else, exchanging vows that meant nothing but heartbreak. However, life in its strange mercy granted him a second chance. Andrew used it to become the father and partner he should have been all along. He poured his energy not just into Glendale grounds, but also into rebuilding the trust he had squandered with Jessica. Slowly, they found their way back to affection. It wasn't like the youthful honeymoon phase they once shared. It was more measured, scarred by pain, but underpinned by a deeper, steadier love forged through hard-earned lessons. Even so, regret was Andrew's daily companion. Some days, it was a dull ache, a reminder of his frailty. On other days, it flared painfully, especially whenever he saw Jessica quietly wipe away tears, triggered by a stray thought of that dark time. But in facing that regret, head-on, in never forgetting it, Andrew found a compass that guided him to be better. Because true redemption, he learned, demands that you remember why you needed it in the first place. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of betrayal, regret, and the fragile hope for redemption. Andrew's story serves as a stark reminder that the choices we make, especially in moments of weakness, can carry consequences that ripple through many lives. Yet it also shows that with honesty, determination, and a willingness to face the past, it's sometimes possible to rebuild what was broken. Jessica's story proves that strength and compassion can coexist, and that setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting the door to healing. If you found value in this story, please give this video a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue to explore real-life dramas and lessons that resonate with the human experience. Together, we can learn from these stories and find hope in the hardest of circumstances.